Hello, Queens. If you're watching the video and I look like I'm being weird, I'm actually freezing. I forgot to put the heating on in my office and I don't want to wait before it warms up. So I'll get warm as I speak. You may also notice that when you start off listening or watching episodes of that I do, you might hear basically, this will make more sense. When I record my podcasts, I do it on Zoom. And when I press record, it says recording in progress. And you hear the end of that voice on the videos and the audios because I've listened back and I can hear it. And it's annoying, but you know what's even more annoying? Having to record it on something else like QuickTime and then having to put that into the audio form to use for the podcast and to faff around, and I'm just not doing it. So I just thought I'd share that with you. Before we get into today's episode, which of course is called Is Food Addiction a Thing, or Is Food Addiction Real? I want to share with you about the December Body Love Binge, which you may have heard me speak about. Applications actually close this Thursday, the 9th of November. And I'm so excited for this. What it is exactly is the whole of December. So there'll be 5 group coaching calls. And so far, as I record this, I've only got 4 women signed up. So it's going to be very intimate. I'm capping it at 10 women anyway, if I have a lot of people wanting to sign up from this. So it's still going to be a very intimate group every weekend. So that the dates are, well, I haven't got them in front of me, but I will send you them if you want to know the exact dates. But it's going to be primarily every Saturday in December. And then there's 1 week where it's going to be on the Sunday because I'm doing something on the Saturday. And the last Saturday in December, it's going to be on the Friday. And it's going to be at 1:30 Central European time, which Central American time, so I think is 6:30 in the morning, because I've also got 2 lovely ladies from Australia joining, and then it will be 10:30 in the evening their time. So I'm almost guaranteeing, unless there's a time zone that I'm not aware of, no matter where you are in the world, it won't be a ridiculous time like 2 a.m. in the morning for our calls. So I've made it work as much as possible. But either way, we're going to be meeting 5 times in December on a grouply call. We're going to have a very, very intimate private support group for daily support from me, extra resources. You're going to have the Body Love Bite program to go through anyway, included in this December Body Love Binge, that you'll actually get access to a couple of weeks before we start. So you can have a lot of teachings and you can learn, and then we can make the most out of the coaching. And depending on what it is that you need, I will share worksheets and resources from you that are only available to my one-to-one clients, depending on whatever it is that you need. So it's going to be a very small, intimate group. I'm going to be able to support you. This is for anyone who is struggling with their relationship with food, whether it is severe restriction, anorexia, orthorexia, bulimia, binge eating. It doesn't matter. If you want food freedom and self-love, then this is for you. And like I said, applications close on Thursday, the 9th. I'll put the link below, and it's also not accessible on my website. So I'll definitely make sure I put the link below. It's in my bio on my Instagram though. And you need to apply to join, and I will be in touch, and I hope to see you there. Okay, second thing, those that are watching the video, can you see behind me that magazine? My lovely husband is on the front of it. I thought I'd put it in my little coaching area because I'm very proud of him. And he's advertising on, well, the magazine is advertising his book, Fuck It, You Can Have It All. And it's an incredible book. I've translated it and read it. And it's actually not about what you might think it will be about. It's about being, not having or doing. It's about being first. Who do you want to be? And then creating a life, relationships, mindset, spiritual practice from that state of being. So it's not just about physically having it all. It's about a holistic way of being as a human and being very happy. Okay, now let's get into the episode. I'm really excited about this because, as I'm going to remind you again, if you've forgotten, which you wouldn't have because you're smart, is food addiction real? This episode was inspired by a lovely friend of mine called Milja. And she said, Could you speak to food addiction? Is there really such a thing? AKA, what is treated by Overeaters Anonymous and the 12 steps, removing sugar and flour from the diet? We know people can be addicted to all sorts of things: sex, shopping, reading, exercise, all things that for others are good for them or healthy. What to do when you have a food addiction that may or may not look like binge eating disorder? Okay, so what another ballsy topic for me to dive into, and hashtag bring it on because I'm ready to tackle this. So let's dive in. I genuinely thought I was addicted to food. It wasn't that long ago that I thought I was addicted to food, especially sugar. I was a self-proclaimed food, sugar, white flour addict. I read all the books about it and agreed with everything that the books were saying. I was like, that's me. I was proclaiming I'm addicted to processed food. That is absolutely me, with everything that they were describing. And I genuinely thought that my only hope of living in a healthy life, or having a healthy life and lifestyle, was to do everything in my power to stay away from my addictive foods and do absolutely everything to abstain from anything that I thought that would trigger my out of control binge eating episodes. And as you can imagine, food always found me, or more so, I always ended up finding the food or face planting the food more so. I was never able to rid myself of my trigger foods for any prolonged period of time until I relapsed into the craziest binges of my life. So maybe you can relate. I'm going to go into that in a bit more detail. Addiction to food is not a recognized medical or psychological disorder. First off, have you ever heard of anybody who was addicted to broccoli, chicken, or potatoes? I didn't think so. So the real question, I believe, what we're asking here is, can you be addicted to processed foods and sugar? While it is true that food can be a pleasurable, rewarding part of life, addiction to food is not a recognized medical or psychological disorder in the same way that addiction to substances like drugs or alcohol is. There are several reasons why food addiction is not a well-established concept. You can tell when I'm reading compared to me just chatting, can't you? My voice tone changes. It's quite funny. Okay, so number one, lack of consensus. Unlike substances such as alcohol, drugs, which have specific chemical properties and physiological effects, food is a diverse and essential part of human life. There is no consensus among experts on what constitutes to a food addiction, and the criteria for diagnosing it remains unclear. Number two, this is probably one of my most favorites, overlapping mechanisms. It just doesn't make sense. We need food to survive. We're all in agreement with that, right? And glucose is the preferred brain's energy source. The brain has natural reward pathways associated with food intake, unless you're in the anorexia migration response, by the way. So this makes it difficult to distinguish between normal eating behaviors and those that might be considered addictive. Now, you cannot be addicted to something that you need to survive. Yes, you can survive without processed foods, but we live in a world where these foods are readily accessible to us. Moreover, our brains are wired to seek out sugar, so it can be challenging to go against these biological instincts in the world we live in. If you do manage to do so, you will almost certainly have an eating disorder. What is plausible is that dopamine helps our brain to remember things that taste good and that give us energy and can motivate us to seek them out when we need a quick fix or a moment of pleasure. When our access is restricted, it may increase our motivation to consume a lot of it when we have the chance. More about that in a moment. Number three, psychological and emotional components. People often turn to food for comfort, stress relief, and emotional reasons. These emotional and psychological factors make it challenging to classify excessive food consumption as an addiction. After years of frustration, I started to look into the science around this food addiction thing, and I came across the book Health at Every Size, which cited a key piece of research that would change my understanding of emotional eating forever. And that is, are you ready? Listen carefully. I'm going to read my own writing to make sure that I deliver it as clear and concise as possible. Compulsive feelings around food, whether emotional eating or straight up binge eating, almost exclusively occur in restrained eaters. That is, people with a history of restrictive thoughts, restrictive feelings, or restrictive behaviors around food. This suggests that when we apply restraint to emotional or binge eating through attempts at abstinence or self-control, we may be contributing to its cause rather than its solution. Is it beneficial to add in other ways to take care of ourselves emotionally and to take care of our emotional needs? Absolutely yes. Is it beneficial to stigmatize emotional eating? Absolutely not. It doesn't even work. What I mean by that is the more you shame and judge yourself around emotional eating, the more you'll then binge eat in reaction to that judgment, which is emotional restriction. When you're judging yourself, you're judging the food you're eating, the amount of food you're eating. The only way, trust me on this, I've tried every other way under the sun. The only way is allowance of emotional eating as you apply self-compassion and gentle curiosity with what the root of the emotional need is. Number 4, lack of withdrawal symptoms. One hallmark of substance addiction is the presence of withdrawal symptoms when the substance is discontinued. While some people may experience cravings or discomfort when trying to eat their eating behaviors, when trying to change their eating behaviors, these symptoms are generally not as severe or consistent as those associated with drug or alcohol withdrawal. Now, I don't recommend withdrawing from your trigger foods. I recommend the complete opposite. Crazy, I know, but again, trust me on this. Let me ask you this. How has restraining from these foods been going for you? Are you happy and emotionally free around these foods? Didn't think so. Number 5, complex nature of eating behaviors. Eating behaviors can be influenced by various factors, including cultural, social, genetic, and environmental influences. These complexities make it difficult to categorize food consumption as an addiction in the same way we classify substance abuse. We're not inhaling sugar from the bag, are we? Although there was one time during a crazy binge, I'd run out of binge food and I literally went and got sugar and started eating it with a spoon and then was like, what the fuck, that doesn't even taste nice. If we were addicted, we'd go straight to the purest source of the thing we're addicted to. So that would be sugar or flavorings that are put into processed foods. We're not doing that. And funnily enough, the more food, the more chocolate in my case. If you know me by now, you know chocolate was going to be in here somewhere. The more chocolate I have at home, especially during my recovery, because I'm recovered now, but the more chocolate I had at home, the less I ate of it, or the less addicted I felt to it. If I didn't have chocolate in the house, or I had like 1 or 2 bars, I would like eat it all and then be panicking that there's not enough, or I needed to get it out the house, it needed to be gone, I needed to eat it all. And I'd want more anyway. But if there's an ample amount of chocolate, too much for me to eat in one go, and trust me, I used to eat a shitload of chocolate in one go, then the more relaxed I could be around it. So it just doesn't make sense either. Number 6, changing food preferences. Food preferences and cravings can change over time, whereas addiction to substances often leads to a consistent preference of the same substance. I've always loved chocolate, as you know, but I can take or leave desserts and chocolate now if they're not my favorite ones. I can only do this now because I allow all foods in all amounts, and I've healed my body image traumas. I've rewired my fear of weight gain, and I've come back home to self-love. So a prime example of this was we went out for a family day on Sunday. You'll laugh at this, but this is a real example. And I went to the toilet, and Wouter went to get us a cup of tea and a drink or whatever. And he said, "Do you want a cake?" And I looked at all the cakes and stuff, and there was cheesecakes and stuff, but none of it was like jumping out at me. There was no gooey brownie. I was just like, meh. So I was like, no, I don't want anything. Thank you. I'll have chocolate later when I get home. And then I went to the toilet and came back, and he'd brought me a chocolate muffin anyway, just because he's nice. And I ate it, but I'm a bit of a snob when it comes to brownies and chocolate. I mean, the muffin was just a dry, boring chocolate muffin. If I'm having a muffin, it needs to be filled with gooey Nutella or caramel. It basically needs to be so sickly that most people can't eat it all. That is my kind of thing. So if Wouter hadn't have brought me the muffin, I ate it and I wasn't even that bothered about it. I wouldn't have got one because I'm just not bothered. Whereas in the restriction, oh my God, I would have had one of all the desserts, even if I didn't like it much, because I was restricting and therefore felt compelled to have one or all of them. Okay, so now I want to talk about my definition of quote addicted when we're talking about food and shopping and sex and all of that. And mine is dependent on versus addicted to. Because I disagree with the idea that people can genuinely be addicted to sex, shopping, reading, exercises, and food. I prefer to use the term dependent on, which is often referred to as addictions. In these areas, and this stems from codependency, which is often a result of complex childhood trauma. So just to reiterate what I was saying, and actually in my model of coaching, I do use a codependent tree. And one of the branches is stemming off from process addictions. And you've got anorexia, you've got sugar, exercise addictions, all of those things. But even still, I disagree with the word addiction, because they're not my models. They're from Pia Melody, her books about childhood trauma and complex childhood trauma. I see it as a dependence, because the term codependency is not typically used to describe one's relationship with non-human objects like food. However, it's possible to have a strong preference for or reliance on certain foods, which may resemble an addictive pattern or be associated with emotional comfort. If we've experienced complex childhood trauma, we often turn to various coping mechanisms without even realizing it. Due to a lack of awareness, we may negatively judge our behaviors without connecting them to our attempts to deal with underlying anxiety. For instance, after struggling for 20 years with eating disorders, I didn't even realize I had anxiety. I was like, I've not got anxiety. And then my coach was like, are you being serious right now? And I'm like, well, I've not got anxiety. Well, what do you think the eating disorder stemmed from in the entire first place? And then we started to dive deep. So I was heavily, I'm getting ahead of myself. My friend Julia says to me, and she's so right, my brain, my mind is further ahead, is further along than my mouth. So like in my head, I'm already ahead. This makes no sense. So like I can't physically speak fast enough because I'm so ahead, and I'm excited to get this out. So bear with me. Let me try again. I was heavily reliant on restriction to cope with something I wasn't even aware of that I was coping with. And that was the underlying chronic anxiety that stemmed from complex childhood trauma that I didn't know I had either until I started to really dive deep. I believed I was obsessed with dieting and restriction because I wanted to constantly lose weight, which seemed like a normal desire in a society focused on weight management and diet culture and beauty culture. And you know the score. It was only after a prolonged period of chronic restriction that I found myself being addicted to food. I developed a physical and emotional dependency on chocolate because I had either been restricting it or attempting to restrict it for so long. Certainly, I was still trying to restrict and compensate for the chocolate I was eating, which kept me in a vicious cycle. I'd convince myself I was addicted to it, attempt to abstain from it, and then eventually I couldn't resist anymore, leading to a binge. I would tell myself, see, I knew I was addicted to it. The pattern continued. What was actually happening was that I was using restriction as a coping mechanism without actually realizing it at the time. However, because my body was instinctively fighting for survival, I would ultimately binge eat. In the process, I could only see my problematic behavior that needed to be changed. So telling myself I was a food addict seemed to make sense to me at the time. If you've got any questions around what I've just shared about the childhood stuff and the anxiety and then trying to cope and all of that, then let me know and I can create an episode on it. But here's the thing, restriction is the cause of the obsession. I've never met a person who I've worked with and in my life actually, who claims to be addicted to food and who hasn't experienced prior restrictions. And as I've already mentioned, it's important to clarify that we cannot be truly addicted to food. We can't. What we often feel is an obsession rather than a true addiction. The obsession kicks in when we try to control ourselves around food. It's like pouring gasoline or petrol, I would say in England, on the fire of our inner struggle. It drowns out our common sense, any willpower, any better judgment we have. It leads us straight to the fridge as if we're on autopilot, unable to resist even for a moment more. Here's something really interesting as well. The abstinence approach for dealing with food compulsions, like 12 steps and all of that, and overeating anonymous. Yeah, I said that right. The abstinence approach for dealing with food compulsions doesn't work well in the long run, much like traditional diets. Most of my eye-opening moments around food was realizing that dieting and the abstinence method for tackling binge eating or quote food addiction are quite similar and tend to yield similar long-term results, aka failure in sticking to the absence model in the first place. Even if after a certain many days, weeks, months, or years, it's again under 5% of people that are quote successful at doing that. If you're like I used to be and want to be in the 5% that successfully restrict and abstain and all of that, you most likely have a restrictive eating disorder. So you don't want to be in that 5% either, trust me. So I want to go into now why believing you're addicted to food is making it worse for you. Because if you believe you're addicted to food, it can be very damaging for several reasons. And it's important to understand why this belief may not actually reflect the nature of food consumption. Number one, stigmatizing and guilt. So stigmatization and guilt. Labeling oneself as addicted to food can lead to feelings of guilt, shame, a sense of failure. I know you know what I'm saying here. This can exacerbate, that's the word. This can exacerbate. I said it perfectly in my head when I was writing it. I used thesaurus for that, I'm not going to lie. This can exacerbate. I swear my unconscious is doing it on purpose now. This can exacerbate whatever. This can make negative emotions worse and potentially lead to further unwanted eating behaviors. Number two, misunderstanding of normal eating, because it's normal to enjoy and find pleasure in food. I'm actually going to repeat that. It's okay to find pleasure in food without earning it. It's okay to just eat food purely for pleasure. So it's normal. Eating is a natural and essential part of life. We have taste buds for a reason. Labeling regular eating habits as an addiction can lead to unnecessary anxiety and distress. Number three, overlooking psychological and emotional factors. Often the desire to categorize food consumption as an addiction overlooks the complex interplay of emotional, psychological, and social factors that influence our relationship with food. These factors include stress, boredom, cultural influences, and social gatherings. Number 4, neglecting nutritional needs. Believing in food addiction may lead to a focus on restriction or elimination of certain foods, potentially neglecting the importance of balanced and nutritious eating for overall health and well-being. For example, cutting out carbs. It's not good for your health in any way, shape, or form. Even if you have diabetes, it's about blood sugar management, not cutting it out. Number 5, promoting unrealistic solutions. If someone believes they're addicted to food, they may seek out extreme or unsustainable solutions, such as severe dietary restrictions or fad diets, which can be detrimental to their physical and mental health in the long run. I'm sure you know all about that. Number 6, undermining body trust and intuition. Now we're talking. Trusting one's body and its signals for hunger and satiety is an important aspect of a healthy relationship with food. Believing in food addiction can lead to disconnect from these natural cues. Number 7, potential for disordered eating. No shit, Sherlock. The belief in food addiction can contribute to the development of eating disorders, disordered eating patterns. It may lead to cycles of restriction followed by episodes of binge eating, which can be harmful to mental health. Number 8, lack of empowerment. Seeing oneself as addicted to food may create a sense of powerlessness, making it harder to develop a positive and empowered approach to eating and self-care. But what about the rodent studies, Victoria? You know, those rat studies where apparently sugar's more addictive than cocaine? The famous rat studies only observed addiction-like behaviors when access to sugar was restricted to limited intervals during the day. When given 24-hour access to sugar, addictive behavior wasn't seen even in rats pre-selected to have a sugar preference. I feel like I want to read that again, so I'm going to. The famous rat studies only observed addiction-like behaviors when access to sugar was restricted to limited intervals during the day. When given 24-hour access to sugar, addictive behavior wasn't seen even in rats pre-selected to have a sugar preference. That says it all. The cocaine thing came into it when they then gave rats a choice of whether they would want cocaine or sugar after starving the rats for a certain amount of time. And then, God forbid, rats chose a food substance over a drug when they were starving, which is ridiculous. Pleasure is not an addiction. Dopamine is just one of the neurotransmitters that are released when we enjoy something. Pleasure feels good, right? It's supposed to feel good. While dopamine is involved in the reward and addiction pathways, it does not mean that you'll become addicted to the foods you like because of all of the above what I've just spoken about. Pleasure and satisfaction are key components of a healthy relationship with food and yourself. I invite you to journal the answer to this question. What is my relationship to pleasure in general? And I don't just mean sexual pleasure. I mean eating pleasure, the pleasure of relaxation, the pleasure of presence, the pleasure of mindfulness, pleasure in general, massage, sensual touch, being pleasured in any way. What's your relationship to that? Because I guarantee if you have a difficult, challenging relationship with food, you will have a challenging relationship with pleasure. It's all interlinked. So to sum up this episode then, the behavior restriction, not the substance, processed foods, is driving your cravings. So it's the restriction, not the processed food, that's driving your cravings. Find ways to normalize these foods with help if needed so that you aren't creating a scarcity mindset. Work towards neutrality and get rid of good or bad food labels. Honor all types of hunger, including taste and pleasure hunger, with attunement and intuitive eating. Make peace with food in your body. So just to really sum it up, trying to abstain from certain foods creates a feeling of obsession with these foods. The only way to achieve mental and emotional freedom around food and let go of your food addiction is to allow all foods in all quantities. Do not attempt moderation at this point either, because that is restriction and you will rebel against it. Moderation comes naturally when you've healed your relationship with food. Trust me, again, I tried the moderation diet and all the things. Work on your emotional and physical allowance around food. Work with someone who understands complex childhood trauma, such as myself, and practice body image, emotional regulation, and self-love work. That is how you go from feeling like you're addicted to food just being a pleasurable, neutral even part of your life. And this is within reach for you. I promise you. I would never in a million years think I could ever say those words out loud. I'm not afraid of weight gain. I eat what I want, when I want. I love food just being a pleasurable, neutral part of my life. And this is available to you too. So, as I said at the beginning, if you want to join us in the December Body Love Binge, where I can help you do this, then I'll pop the link below. If you have any questions about any of what I've just said, please let me know. Sending you so much love. Thank you for being here. Oh, and also a big shout out to the lovely Helena, who sent me a very lengthy, beautiful email from the heart the other day. Much love to you. Mwah. Bye-bye. See you next time.